Have you ever had that moment where something completely ordinary, something that's extremely familiar to you, that you barely even notice, suddenly becomes the spark that changes how you see the world? It might be a word that your grandmother used. It might be a local place name you've passed 1,000 times, or a bit of folklore that never meant much to you. But one day something makes that all change. It hits you differently. That tiny shift in your mindset, your meon, the mindset, the way you think, can make the everyday sometimes extraordinary. It makes the ordinary extraordinary. And that's exactly what this episode is all about. Because there's something that we use constantly, every day, without ever thinking about it. And hidden inside it is an entire worldview. It's the calendar. In this episode of Cordia, we're going to look at the calendar. Through Irish, the everyday becomes a doorway to something deeper, a greater understanding of your own culture. Things that we barely notice, the words we use, the names we say without thinking, suddenly open up whole worlds of meaning. And the calendar is one of the best examples of that. It seems so fixed, so neutral, so unremarkable. But once you look at it through Gaeilge, through Irish, you realise it's actually a hidden map of worldview. So here's what I'm promising you in this episode. By the time you finish this episode, you're going to have a new meon agana, a new mindset around the so-called ordinary. You'll see how some of the English month names, the ones we take for granted, don't really fit the Irish worldview at all. You'll discover how the Irish names, especially the native ones, don't just rename the months, they reveal an entire way of understanding time. A worldview built on land, light, darkness, harvest, ritual, and rhythm. By the end of this episode, you'll never look at the year the same way again. You're listening to Undercover Irish Cordia, where we explore Ireland's hidden curriculum. Lessons never formally taught, but we always carry with us. We find them in ballads, in place names, in Irish words that we use without thinking. It's the history that lives on the edges of the textbook, but sits at the centre of our story. Ismisha Olin agus Fáilte wrote. I love exploring the meanings behind our language, our lore. I love blending history, linguistics and culture through story. Each episode shows how Ireland's real education has always been with us, and we just need to reveal it. For anyone who's ever felt there was more to Ireland than the version they learned in school, Undercover Irish invites you to rediscover the Ireland that's been with you all along, in the words, in the memories, and in the music. A Cordia, a Roigling le Céile. Okay, Cordia, let's get straight to it. Before we talk about the extraordinary, we need to talk about the ordinary. The months that we use day in, day out, week in, week out, month in, month out, and year in, year out, without even thinking about the origin of the names or what they mean. I might have mentioned them as the English calendar, but in truth, it's more of a Roman hangover, a kind of a Roman calendar. So let's look at what we use without even thinking. January, February, March, and April. January comes from Janus, the Roman god of doorways and transitions. February is named after a Roman purification rite, a completely different culture, a completely different belief system. And March comes from Mars, the Roman god of war. Not bad, I suppose, if you want to conquer half of Europe. April, its thought comes from a Latin word which means to open. So at least there's a kind of a rhyme there with the time of year, with spring. It's thought that it means something to do with buds opening. Those are January, February, March, April. What about the gods, the emperors, and the audacity? Well, May and June. May comes from Maya, the Roman goddess associated with growth new life, things flourishing. June is named after Juno, the Roman goddess of marriage and childbirth. Again, Roman deities are baked right into our everyday language and we don't even think about it. But perhaps my favourites, in a sarcastic way, are July and August for sheer audacity. Right in the middle of our summer, we have 2 months named in honour of Roman emperors. July, named after Julius Caesar, and August, named in honour of Augustus Caesar. These aren't gods, obviously, they're just men, very powerful men who've been put into our calendar to be remembered and honoured forever. But if all of those names or month names don't necessarily make sense in a modern context or indeed an Irish context, the next ones are even worse. September, October, November, December. So September comes from a word septum, which means 7. October comes from octo, meaning 8. Think of the octagon. November comes from novem, meaning 9. And December comes from decem, meaning 10. So September should mean the 7th month, but it's in actual fact our 9th month of the year. October means the 8th month, but it's the 10th month. November means the 9th month, and yet it's the 11th month in the calendar. And December means 10. Think of the decimal system, and yet it is our 12th month. And the thing that strikes me about these, first of all, we use them without even thinking. Second of all, they're very far removed from our own culture and so many cultures around the world which also use them. There's a lack of meaning there, there's a lack of connection there. And now to start to uncover, perhaps make the ordinary extraordinary, we need to start to look at the Irish calendar, the Gaeilge. Now, Chorja, let's get to the calendar as Gaeilge. For reasons which will become clear in a minute, I won't necessarily be going exactly in order. The first months that we got to introduce ourselves to are indeed January, February, March and April. The Gaeilge that we use for those are Anar for January, Fiora for February, Morta for March, Abrán for April. So what you see there is pretty much a translation from the ancient Rome or the older Roman name straight through into Gaeilge. The same follows for July. Remember Julius Caesar's month? We call that Úil. And the last month of the year, the word that we use is Nullig. This comes from Natalicia, the birthday of Christ. So what we see in those months, Anar, Fiora, Morta, Abrán, Úil, and Nullig, what we see there is the influence of the Roman Empire and Christianity coming together. So the coming of the religion to Ireland and the influence that the church held over the Irish way of life. They've taken the Roman names and they've put an Irish title on them. They've translated them to Gaeilge. And while these month names reveal a lot to us, they reveal the coming of Christianity, they reveal the influence of the Roman Church over the Irish way of life, the real reveal, the real turning of the ordinary into the extraordinary lies behind the native month names that have survived. Because, Accordia, basically we've looked at borrowed Irish names, ones that were shaped by Latin and by Rome. But it's time for the real reveal, because the native Irish month names aren't just labels, they're gateways to a completely different way of understanding life and time. These are the powerhouse months, the ones packed with Celtic meaning, carrying echoes of festivals far older than the calendar in your phone and far older than Christianity. Let's have a look. The first one, Accordia, is what we have for May in place of May. Bealtaine. No, Bealtaine does not mean May. May does not mean Bealtaine. Bealtaine comes straight from the ancient fire festival. It marked the beginning of summer, the moment when cattle were driven through protective fires and people stepped boldly into the light half of the year. It's not May, it's a threshold, a crossing, a ritual of renewal. Then you have Acharja, what we call June, Mehiv. Mehiv essentially is mid-summer. Fields are exploding with growth and the land is alive. This is the season where communities would come together for the big jobs, the turf, the hay, the heavy work that required many hands. And I always associated with Mehil, even though they're not linguistically linked, Mehiv and Mehil. Mehil is when people come together in community and work together. Then Acharja, we have one of the big ones. In place of August, remember that's named after Augustus Caesar. In Ireland, it's Lúnasa. Now, Lúnasa comes from Lúnasa, the festival of Lugh. Lugh was one of the biggest gods in the old Celtic Ireland. This was the first harvest of the year, celebrated with gatherings, games, trading, matchmaking, and fairs. And even through to today, we still have fairs at that time. The whole month named after the festival of abundance and community. Staying with Lúnasa for a second, Acharja, Lúnasa is also linked to one of our counties, County Louth. The Gaeilge for County Louth is Cúnta an Lugh. So the old Irish festival marking the start of the harvest season, named after the god Lugh, is also linked to Cúnta an Lugh, named after the same deity, the same god, Lugh of the long arm, Lugh Lámh Ada. In medieval sources, Lugh's cult, the centre of his cult was said to be around the Louth village, Cúnta an Lugh, which was once a sanctuary or a fort associated with him. So that's an interesting little segue. Back to the months of Acharja. The next two flow very handily or very nicely from Lúnasa because they're linked to the harvest as well. We have Man 4 and Dara 4. Man 4 is what we call September. Man 4 means the middle of the harvest. So man is kind of like middle. Think about Man Skull is what we call a secondary school, but literally means middle school. Man 4, the middle of the harvest, tells you exactly where you stand in the year's work. It's time of gathering, storing and preparing. Then we have Dara 4, the end of the harvest, the one final push, the last chance to get everything ready before the winter closes in. It's not just a month, it's a deadline written into the landscape. Then, Acharja, we come to something we've touched on in this podcast recently, what we call November, Samhain. So we're essentially talking about the summer's end, the end of the light. It marks the beginning of winter and the famous thinning of the veil between the worlds, this world and the other world. It's where the hinge of the Celtic year happens, the moment when the light dies and the dark rises. These names aren't just poetic, they're survivors of a much older time system, one that understands the year in a way more organic, natural, and a far more alive way than the Roman calendar we inherited. It reveals to us the true Celtic calendar, because these month names sit on an older Irish world, the Celtic two-season cycle. The year was divided into two halves. The light half from Bealtaine to Samhain, the half from Samhain to Bealtaine. And at the heart of that cycle were four great festivals. Samhain, winter begins, the other world is near. Imbolc, or Imbolg, the first of spring, around the time of Lá Labrida, St. Bridget's Day now. Bealtaine, where fires are lit and the summer opens. And Lúnasa, the first harvest, the celebration of the god Lugh. This was a world without a 7-day week that arrived later with Christianity. Time wasn't divided neatly or evenly into boxes. It moved with the moon's cycle. It moved according to the tasks that needed to be done. It moved with the seasons, the movement of cattle, and the powerful festival thresholds. Time wasn't a grid. It was lived. It was cyclical. It was liminal. It had edges, openings, and even crossings. And the names that we still use of Corja, Bealtaine, Lúnasa, Samhain, these are remnants of that worldview. They're not just month names, but they're memories of fire, harvest, community, the other world, the rhythm of a land-based life. In my opinion, they outshine the English names or the Roman names that we use completely because they carry meaning, story, and identity in every single syllable. So, Corja, we started with something completely ordinary. Month names, the calendar that we use without even thinking. We saw how the English or the Roman ones are really foreign labels. And we saw how the borrowed Irish ones, they start to feel a bit more grounded. But really, until we stepped into the native Irish and Celtic months, that was when the ordinary becomes extraordinary. That's the meon agana shift, the mindset change. When you look at the time through Gaeilge, through Irish, you don't just measure the year, you understand it. So the next time that you use or say Bealtaine or Lúnasa or Samhain, you're connected not just to a more relevant way of measuring time, but you're connected to a much older tradition, a much older worldview, a much older meon agana mindset. Because when we think through Irish, even the time itself becomes a doorway. I set myself the target of trying to change your mindset, your meon agana, around something really simple like the calendar in 20 minutes or in under 20 minutes. I might have gone slightly over that. My apologies, but I'm not far off it. Corja, if you've enjoyed this podcast, please do listen back to the other podcasts if you haven't already. Please do recommend or share with a friend, share on social media, follow on Instagram. And if you want to support the work of this podcast, please consider supporting on Patreon. It makes a huge, huge difference in terms of overheads. And the podcast is obviously ad-free. The podcast, The Corja, on the way, the second part of the Margaret Buckley saga, will be dropping soon. I delayed it ever so slightly because I want to make sure it does justice to her memory and it tells the story in the best way I possibly can. That will be on the way, a Corja. And just two other focal scores. First of all, I'm currently sporting, speaking of the months of the year, I'm currently sporting a Movember and raising funds for Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, who do incredible work. So if you want to support that, I'll have a link in the show notes. It'd be very much appreciated. And lastly, a Corja, just a recommendation. In this podcast, we often use the Irish language, amongst other things, to delve deeper into various subjects. And just a recommendation, if you are interested in the Changa and learning a little bit more. Recently, I've been reading the book Gaeilge Guide by Molly, and I highly recommend it to anyone who wants to learn. I love the way that she structures it. There's something in that book for everyone, whether you're brand new to the language, whether you're someone who's trying to reconnect with the language, or even someone like myself with a little bit more experience of the language. I still got so much out of the book. And what I love about her approach to it is that she doesn't shy away from colonization and the effect of colonization, which I think is central to understanding the current situation around Gaeilge and indeed our own language history and our own cultural history as well. So just a recommendation for that book for any Fowler Muir or anyone who'd like to learn a little bit more about the language on Gaeilge. Corja, thank you so much for being with me on this episode of the podcast. Gur míle maithagad a socht bheith for the moment, sinna bhfuil slán go fóill agus beirigí bua mo Corja.